So, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June Pathway session on parent relapse prevention with Brenda Zane. I'm Paul Reinhardt, founder of the New Canaan Parent Support Group. Our group hosts weekly parent support meetings, and we hold monthly pathway sessions like this one. And you can find out more about us by going to ncparentsupportgroup.org. And you can also learn about our upcoming September 1 community vigil. And now just a few words about Brenda. Brenda Zane is a certified parent coach, host of the podcast Hope Stream, and founder of an online community, The Stream, for moms of kids with substance use disorder. And I think it's true that you are now starting an online community for dads, aren't you, Brenda?
Okay. Yes,
thumbs up.
It's in the works. Yes.
All right. Brenda learned so much during a period of at least 5 years when the oldest of her sons struggled with addiction and multiple overdoses. While Brenda tried to maintain her career in advertising and marketing, she eventually decided to transition to serving parents, given the fear, confusion, and sense of helplessness that all parents feel while having a child who's misusing drugs or alcohol.
Now, you want Brenda, to hear about parent support for people with, okay.
Brenda lives in Seattle, where they're just starting to come into that sunny time of year, which lasts for 10 to 12 weeks, right, Brenda?
Yes.
And
so we don't miss a single one of those minutes.
And she lives with her husband, sons, and 2 dogs. And her oldest son, who struggled, is now safe and in recovery. So the way we'll do this is we'll let Brenda speak, and then afterwards we'll just open it to any questions or comments. So, without further delay, would you please join me in welcoming Brenda Zane?
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is so great. I feel like whenever I talk at a group like this, it makes me so happy because I feel like I'm with my people. Like you all are my people because you understand what it's like to be a parent of, whether it's an adolescent or a young adult or an adult child. The pain is the same and the fear is the same. And so, like Paul said, I had a long career in advertising and marketing. And for the last 5 or 6 years of that career, my oldest son was getting into really high risk lifestyle. We live in a suburb of Seattle, but he started getting into this kind of thug gangster lifestyle, which kind of made me, I looked at him and he's this little, like suburban kid, and he's trying to be all tough and be the gangster. And of course that led to substance use and 5 years of just, you all know, the roller coaster that we go on with our kids. And I will spare you all the details because I'm sure you all have gone through most of them, but we were able to get him into a wilderness therapy program when he was 16 because he had decided 2 days after he got his driver's license that he would drive from Seattle to Northern California to pick up 8 pounds of marijuana, and drive it back to Seattle with the drug dealer friends that he was hanging out with. So that was where we started at 16 is when we really realized that this was kind of beyond our parenting level of skill. And so we did get him into wilderness therapy and residential treatment after that. He ran away from that program and then just meandered in and out of, use treatment. People have asked me how many times did he relapse. I'm like, I wouldn't even be able to tell you because it was just this constant cycle. And there was a lot of anger. I'm sure you all deal with a lot of that too. So it was very traumatic for us as parents. I was navigating this with a brand new husband, and my ex was semi-involved. He kind of thought it was a phase until we got to the point of the driving to California to do a drug deal. So we were navigating it from a lot of different ways. And then fast forward through all kinds of drama. In 2017, I got the phone call that I'm sure some of you have gotten, which is this girl on the phone said, your son overdosed and he's in the hospital and you should probably go. And he was 19, so the hospital couldn't call us. You lose those rights as a parent after, even if your child still needs you. So come to find out, he had overdosed twice that week. So this was on a Friday. He had also overdosed on Wednesday, of course, on a combination of fentanyl and Xanax, which was his drug that really controlled him. And he was on life support for 3 days. Doctors told us to get the family there, that this is really where it usually ended. And so we did all of that. And my kiddo somehow miraculously came through that experience and lived. They call him a medical miracle because nobody at the hospital can figure out how he's alive and functioning. His brain is fine. And so when it took a very long time for him to recover from that, both physically, because he had a stroke and a heart attack, and he had to relearn how to walk and talk and dial a phone and tell time. We were on the stroke unit with all the 80, 90-year-olds. Here's a 19-year-old kid relearning how to do all of those things. So I finally got back to work after that, and it was so meaningless what I was doing. I was in advertising, and it wasn't fitting for me. I was like, oh my gosh, there have to be other parents out there who are going through this. I can't be the only one. I had dipped my toe into Al-Anon a little bit, so I knew that there were some other people out there, but I just thought, why is nobody talking about this? Our kids are suffering. And if it was cancer, if it was any other thing, we would be like, going out and doing fundraising and all of that. So I ended up leaving that career, which I was ready to leave anyway, and really wanted to find a way to support parents. And so that's what I do now with my podcast, Hope Stream, which I started right at the beginning of the pandemic. So that was a little fortunate in that it really, I think a lot of people tuned in during that time because they were really isolated and looking for ways to connect. So started that. Then I started the community for moms because I kind of thought, what would I have wanted when I was going through it? And I was still going through it, and I'm still going through it because it's something that we all go through. So one of the things that I think when I talk with parents is really hard is the whole relapse situation. And so when Paul and I were talking about this meeting tonight, we just thought that might be something good to focus on. But I'm an open book, so I'm happy to answer questions later about anything. But I think just touching a little bit on lapses, relapses, return to use. There's some different language that we can use around that. And I think you guys, I don't know if any of you, Paul said that you had Erica Lebetkin on, who's an amazing therapist. She's very knowledgeable in craft, and she was on my podcast. So I'm going to just share some slides, mostly to keep me on track because I sometimes get off track because I love talking about all of this. But I just want to go through kind of 5 things that bubbled up to the top for me when I look back over my son's illustrious relapse career, which it was very illustrious. And the first one is really managing expectations when your son or daughter is either in treatment or new to sobriety, and then really, trying to keep things into perspective, because we tend to spend a lot of energy trying to get our kids to help, whether that's treatment or whether that's, you know, a coach or a mentor or something like that. I kind of equate it to planning a wedding. Like, we get so excited and we plan this amazing wedding, and then we never really plan for what's going to happen when we have that first really big fight. Like, what kind of language do we want to use with each other? How do we want to communicate with each other? We've spent so much time focusing on the wedding. We haven't really thought about what's life going to be like after that. And so I kind of put it in that that viewpoint, because it helps us to see through, so that we don't see treatment, or we don't see, you know, a period of abstinence as the end of the road. You know, and also, like, if we get married and then we have a fight, does that mean that we get divorced and we have to start all over from ground zero and start dating again? No, you just sort of figure out where you are and then you keep going. And so I think getting our expectations set around what this experience is going to be like is really, really helpful, because it's paralyzing to watch them start to take backward steps, and it can be super scary, but there's really some things that we can do to be better prepared for that. So this is really what I think of what we want our kids' recovery to look like. Oh, great, we got them into treatment. We're going to spend 30 days or so, and then they're going to come out and it's all going to be unicorns and rainbows. And this is actually more of what it's probably going to look like. A little bit of everything, a lot of amazing, like, yay, and then a lot of this, like the dog down here, like, huh, what was that? There's just so much, and it's that roller coaster, and it's the ups and the downs, and our heads are spinning because, you know, they seem to be making progress, and then they take steps back, and it's like, well, wait, now you're sabotaging your recovery. And so getting those expectations set is really important. And then being prepared, and kind of knowing what might be coming is really important, because relapse, unfortunately, is more common than for them not to relapse. And I thought this was an interesting kind of statistic, that substance use has similar percentages of relapse as other kinds of diseases. And so I think it can help to just recognize that this is not unusual if it happens. It's actually going to be more unusual if your child just gets into some sort of a recovery situation and then never relapses. And that absolutely does happen. I know people, my business partner, her son was that way, but that's not completely normal. So being prepared is incredibly important. And the CRAFT, community reinforcement and family training, is really a great approach to that. And that's, I'm guessing that's probably what Erica talked about. It's that way of communicating and having tools that keep your relationship together and keep you moving toward the goal of getting healthier, versus an approach of, well, until you hit rock bottom, we're done, you figure it out, and let me know when you're better. So that's that approach. So instead of kind of tiptoeing around on eggshells and not talking about anything and just hoping that everything's going to be better, it's really good to get to the point where you can be more open about what might happen. So I'm just going to move my window around here because I can't totally see. And this is hard, because I know for myself, when my son would come out of treatment, I did not want to utter the word relapse, because I thought if I did, I was going to jinx it, or I was going to, that meant to him, it's okay if you do relapse. And so I did what I think a lot of people do, which is I didn't talk about it. I just pretended like everything was fine. We're just going to move on now, and, you know, we're good to go. So that's probably not the best approach. And talking about it is not going to make it happen. And so there's some things that I'll go over that I think as part of being open can be really helpful. One is to just discuss it with your son or daughter, because if they've been in treatment, they 99% of programs are going to have them create a relapse prevention plan before they leave treatment. A lot of times it might get wadded up and thrown in the garbage can before they even leave, depending on what their mindset is when they're leaving treatment. So parents often never see this or hear about this plan, but 99% of the time they've got a relapse prevention plan. And that has them list out things like, what are my triggers? Who are the people that I shouldn't hang around? Who are the people I should hang around? And so it's just a little bit of a roadmap for them. And so asking them about that, hey, did you ever do a relapse prevention plan? What was on it? How did it feel when you were putting it together? How can we support you in making that more, actionable? So I know it's really hard to talk about that, but even using that relapse prevention plan as a springboard for the conversation can be helpful. But I think what I've learned is that we need our own relapse prevention plan as parents, because we know that there's a high probability that's going to happen. And we know that we are so impactful in helping our kids through this experience. And so some of the things that we can put in our own plan is we can ask ourselves, what are the things that I should be aware of? Like, your son or daughter better than anybody. So who are the people that could be a signal if they're hanging out with them that could get into kind of sketchy territory? What patterns do I see my child returning to? Because those could be signs, and those are we kind of talk about those as the prelapse. Like, they're kind of like, oh yeah, I could probably hang out with that guy, or I could probably hang out with that girl, or maybe it's an ex relationship. And those are the things that we can just have our little spidey senses aware of, to be looking out for. And then also in our own plan to talk about and to think about, who are my people? Like, you guys have this group, which is amazing, but who are my people that if things start to go downhill, that I can reach out to? And I like to write these out. So I would go into crazy mode when my son would start to relapse. So I would start driving to all the places where I knew he used to hang out. And I would go to all the drug dealer houses, which probably wasn't super safe. And I would just go into like detective mode, and I would get crazy. And I had one girlfriend that I could call, and she would just kind of snap me out of it. So having an idea of who your people are is really important. And then thinking through and having the conversation with your child beforehand to say, hey, if I start noticing these things, I'm here to help you. I really want to support you. If I start to see some of these prelapse indicators, what should I do? What is the best way for me to communicate that to you? It's probably not yelling and screaming and well, you shouldn't be hanging out with that guy. Like, how are we going to have that conversation? Kind of goes back to we just got married, now we have our first fight. How are we going to communicate with each other around a topic could feel kind of awkward? Finding out, like, what is the role that you want me to play in that when I see that happen? I have a mom in our community. It's a really genius idea. I talked about it in a recent episode. She and her daughter agreed. Her daughter is 17. They agreed that if she relapsed, that she couldn't talk to her mom about it, that she would text her an apple emoji. I have no idea why an apple, but that was just their little signal. Because her daughter was like, Mom, I just don't feel like I can tell you if I'm getting close to that. And so they just had this simple little sign, and then the mom knew, okay, she's feeling unstable. And then they had a little plan. Let's call this person, let's call that person. So you can get really creative with it too, and just think like, what would feel the best to you? And then it's also a good idea then to have a little list that's readily available. Maybe it's on the refrigerator or somewhere handy, that's just a list of those early things that can be put into place. So it's like, okay, well, here's a mentor that you could call. Here's maybe they have a sponsor. Here's a meeting that you could get to. Here's a therapist, or maybe there's a yoga class that you like to do, or you like to go mountain climbing. Because sometimes when they start to get into that relapse period, all of the good ideas go out the window. So having those readily available, very visible, like here's 10 things that you love to do, or people that you like to talk to, let's go to those instead of the opposite direction. And then what self-care practices do I need to put into action? So like we have our little plan for them, and we have our little plan for us. You know, for me, I had to call that one friend who would talk me out of driving around looking for drug dealers. You know, what can I grab onto when I start to feel the anxiety and the like, oh, it's going to happen again? And just that are the things that you can prepare ahead of basket, actually, that she puts stuff into. She has Zane in there, she's got a water bottle, and I can't remember what else, a couple of other things that are, that's her little basket. And she knows if things start to get a little crazy, or she's feeling like she's goes and things. So really about it is tend to have to kind of back away and go around this and not. Curious is also a big part of this. This can take some.
Brenda, we're starting to lose you.
I lost her.
Did we lose her completely?
I don't see her.
I think we
She'll
did.
come back.
Yeah.
Have faith. I think so far it was good, though. You know, I think she's dead on with this. So I can't wait to hear the rest of it.
I wish I had this the first time we went through this, you know, like 5 years ago. This would have been good for me to listen to. It seems like when you're you get the good suggestions when, you know, you've been at it for a while. It would be nice to have it right away.
Yeah.
So Paul, does your group encourage exchanging, not real personal information, but stories back and forth? I'm in 2 Al-Anon groups, and they don't like you to talk about your qualifier or go back and forth during the meeting. You can kind of set up times afterwards. How does this group work?
We allow crosstalk, and in fact, it's encouraged.
We encourage it.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
It's very different from Al-Anon. I had the same issue with Al-Anon. I left Al-Anon feeling very as isolated as I felt going in, and I just I tried a bunch of different groups, but I left feeling kind of dejected more than encouraged when I left Al-Anon meetings. But when I found Paul's group, it really changed my life.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah, Paul, there's another group in Albany that I belong to. That's the hometown where Paul and I grew up in, and that's pretty good. They do encourage talk back and forth. Even Al-Anon, I mean, it's kind of comforting to hear people going through the same thing, but I mean, it would be nice to have some exchange or, you know, something like that. It just feels like you know, not wasted, but it's just like 1.5 hours of just banging your head against the wall and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, this one parent in our group likes both. She likes our group and she likes Al-Anon. But for her, she said during COVID, when the Al-Anon groups were online, that it was hard for her.
Yeah.
So Brenda is just texted and said, my Wi-Fi stopped. I'm working on getting reconnected.
Okay.
So, yeah, we could hear her slowly getting worse.
Yes.
I was just, you know.
Yeah.
But
I think she muted most of us, so I couldn't tell. Some faces looked like they were frozen, but I don't think they were. I think it was just her.
Yeah, I think it was her. I was hoping it wasn't me. So anybody on this call know that their son or daughter had a relapse prevention plan?
I haven't gotten that far yet. I mean, I'm just not convinced that my son ever really, you know, got healthy. I think he was like, you know, 2 to 4 weeks maybe at most where he wasn't using. So relapse is hopeful, but I don't think I'm there yet.
How about you, Liza? Did your son have a relapse prevention plan?
I don't know, and I'm really happy to hear about it right now because he's still in the residential program in North Carolina. So I will be asking in our next family session. And I was very interested to hear her specific language because it really does feel scary to even just say the word.
Yeah.
So that's giving me courage. I will say Drew got a job in a restaurant that's primarily breakfast and lunch, but they do serve alcohol. And he told them in the interview, I'm in recovery. And he said, I feel really happy that I was very open about it. And they were very accepting. So that seemed like a positive, but I'm just happy to have this information. I hope she comes back.
How about you, Rich?
So I was going to say, what was enlightening for me was I go to another group that is actually, it's kind of unique. It's parents and alumni of Karen. So it's parents of people that are patients there, but also alumni. And it's interesting to hear the alumni, and a lot of the alumni now have children who are now qualifiers. So there's a very broad range of perspectives. And I don't want to say it's desirable. I don't want to trivialize it in any way, but they have a very different perspective on relapse. They view it as sort of something that happens, and it happens a lot. And they don't view it with a lot of the same panic and fear that I view it in the context of my child having a relapse. And it's been a source of a little bit of peace. I mean, it's not the ideal. It's not what I wanted to go in here, right? Ideally, I'd like to hear we spend all this time, we spend all this money, we spend all these resources, we've restructured our life, and this doesn't happen anymore. But it's interesting to hear addicts talk about relapses of their children who have the same love for their children that I do, that it will happen. And many of them say, you know, it's not the end, the initial relapse is not the end of the world. Now, obviously, if you relapse and overdose and die, it is the end. It is very tragic, right? But it does happen, and it's sort of part of the addictive mind, and it's just it's just something to recognize and not be intimidated by any more than to not be intimidated by the initial addiction. I mean, it's part of your life now, and a person who's a mainstay in the group has a qualifier who has some very chronic mental health conditions. and to hear her perspective, which is separate from addiction. I hear her talk about, this is part of our life now. We live with this, right? We think about it and we function with it. Not happily. Nobody's, having a party, but they're also not living with that paralyzing fear. They recognize that it can occur and that you can do what you can do. And as long as you're doing as much as you can do, I hate to sound redundant. This is going to be, I didn't really plan this. I haven't done this before, talked about it before. That's all you can do, right? That's what you can do. They have to make their decision. But it's the same as when they initially come into recovery, right? I can't, the most sobering day for me was when I was talking to my son's case manager. He said, look, you can't want it for him. This was after he was a year through the recovery process. And just like you can't want his initial recovery for him, you can't want him to not relapse for him. And it's kind of scary. I don't deny that, but I think recognizing it for what it is can help you best be able to make the right decision at the time.
Right. Now, what I thought she was good about was saying just having that open conversation is so important, and that getting permission in advance of, okay, if you are, and this is a new term for me, prelapse, if you are, having these behaviors that seem to be leading you to relapse, what can I do and to help? And, can I actively be involved in something to help you at that time? Maybe it's just talking about it, but maybe it's something else. That's good to have in advance when, I think it's a much healthier way to have the conversation. But by what I mean when I say much healthier is, when my son came out of treatment, we were advised by the family therapist, his individual therapist, the case manager leaving, we should have a contract. And if you start to exhibit the following behaviors, you can't live here anymore. Well, all those following behaviors were what you would have is signals in a relapse prevention plan. But we called it a contract, which made it much more confrontational. It made it much more adversarial. And it would have been greatly improved if what we said was, we called it, how we're all going to get along to have a healthier life, or whatever, a better way to describe that for the end goal we all wanted. Because my goal wasn't to try and enforce the contract. It was the worst position I've been in a parent in quite a while. Like, what was I going to do? Every day I got to decide, was his behavior so bad I got to put him out or not? I didn't want to put him out. I wanted him to get better. And calling it a path to get better would have been so much better than a path to, here's where I'm going to cut you off if you're not pulling your weight.
Yeah, I think if you call it a plan of action instead of a contract, or a prevention plan, or a forward plan, just something. A plan is much better than a contract.
Well,
a plan means action. It doesn't mean, what's the word? Punitive, something
right,
punitive.
Right. If we just called it indications of healthy behavior, of a healthy life, because the agreement was I would support a healthy life.
Right.
I wouldn't, in contrast to, I wouldn't continue to support an unhealthy life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the way she views it is definitely very, very productive, and helps put the focus on where everybody wants it to go.
Well, I like the new parlance is actually, you don't use relapse anymore, you use recurrence. So again, it's another one of those things. It's very nuanced, but relapse sounds like a failure, whereas a recurrence sounds like something that happened. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't own it. Like if you have lung cancer and you continue to smoke or whatever, that's not, you're engaging in behaviors that put you at risk. So, but relapse kind of just, there's a negative connotation, whereas recurrence kind of sounds like it's something that's happening that, you're trying what you can to prevent. But I had a cancer recurrence myself. So is it my fault? Did I try to live as best I could? Yes. But did I stop getting mammograms when I couldn't afford them because I had no health insurance? Yes, I did. So, that's what happens, but it was a recurrence. It wasn't, I didn't relapse in my cancer prevention. It recurred. So
about lapse, because I was doing some reading, and there's a difference too between lapse and relapse. And a lapse, apparently people use that term for, let's say, it might be a night, it might be a couple of days.
right. The thing I feel with lapse as well is that that's a conscious decision almost, you know, like I'm a lapsed Catholic. I choose to go to church only on Easter and Christmas. I'm definitely a lapsed Catholic. So I feel like, again, there's a little bit of blame and self-recrimination in that.
Mm.
And the whole idea is you're trying to find ways to put people on a path toward recovery and not feel like they are going to be judged or looked askance, etc. So I think that's why people are trying to use a term like recurrence. And even misuse and abuse, it's really just substance use. It's really, even misuse is, again, there's a little bit of blame, a little bit of judgment in it. And it's why it's substance use disorder, not substance misuse disorder or substance abuse disorder. It's just substance use disorder. Just all these little nuanced things where sometimes you think it might not make a difference, but it does. I know with my son, we once talked about relapse and he said, I don't know if I could tell you, you know, and I don't know if it was because he thought that I would judge him. I think it was more that he was afraid of hurting me again and putting me in that position again to worry and panic. And so I love the example that she gave of the daughter just sending a text of an apple, just so she has an idea, but she doesn't have to actually say the words. And at least that opens a conversation.
Well, we have somebody on the line, and I don't think we're going to be able to see Brenda's face anymore or her slides. But Brenda, are you on?
I am. I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi just completely died. So I apologize profusely. That's so bad. Actually, it looks like it might be coming back. So I'm going to try to join again. But where was I?
You were in a great
getting
spot.
Curious.
We loved it. We're
ready.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I might be able to get back on here. So I think so you should see me. Can get back on.
Yay.
Okay. Yay.
Okay.
There you are. Hey.
So painful. So sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let me do this. Okay. So as far as getting curious, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think that can really help to take some of the crazy emotions that come up out of it, is just to say, maybe this, like, look at this a little bit more as an experiment, a little bit more of what data can I collect? What was going on? Who's he hanging out with? Or who's she, seeing? What was the job? Was there a job? No job? Just really kind of being an investigator. Like, that's the time when it is okay to be the crazy detective, is really like figuring out what are the circumstances around this. Not that it's going to answer everything, but it's going to start to leave you clues along the way. What did you learn about your plan when this happened? Did your plan, it's kind of like a birth plan, right? You think you have the best intention, like, this is how my birth is going to go, and then nothing goes that way. If that was the case with your relapse prevention plan, then maybe it needs to be revised, and you can learn about it. But talking with them about it in that way, as far as like, let's just see what worked. Like, oh, that worked. Well, that totally didn't work. Gets it a little bit out of the emotional space of, oh my gosh, you do this all the time, and can't you see what you're doing with your life? It's like, just stay in the moment, try to keep focused on what's happening there, and see how they handled it as well. So it can be a little bit more of that dialogue, instead of all of the drama. So that was getting curious. And then this one, you all already have this group, which is amazing, but it's really getting surrounded with other people who you can talk to about it, who aren't going to go off the deep end. If you know, some people you could talk to about it. Some people will think that, you know, your kid's going to never get out of this, and just add to the complexity. So just staying connected with a group, this group, it might be Al-Anon, it might be, you know, the communities that I have. The Partnership to End Addiction has amazing group meetings. So just staying connected so that you don't end up in isolation, which is the worst place to end up. So the good news in all of it is we do heal. This is my son 2 years ago. So this would have been about 3 years after his last overdose. He's now, I was telling Paul, working at the treatment, one of the treatment programs that he ran away from when he was 17. He's actually back there working with the young guys, helping them navigate this time. So, and if you would have asked me that or told me that 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would have laughed you off the planet, because this kid was a nightmare, to himself, to the family, destroying everything in his path. And he was seemingly enjoying it. You know, he enjoyed hurting me and stealing from me and his dad and everything else. So the first episode of my podcast tells our story. I had to keep it kind of G-rated for Apple's ratings. So you'll get the light version of what happened with him. But I tell you what, if this kid can come through it, and do what he's doing now, there is hope. So these are just some resources, and I'll send this to Paul so he can send it out to you if you want it. The podcast is there. This community is the one for moms. The one for dads is coming in July. And so it will be that place where guys can get connected with other guys and have a safe place to talk about all of this stuff, get some really good tools. We'll be having craft workshops and things like that. And then you can send me a message or find my email there. And then there's some resources here as well if you want those. So I'll be sure to send those through. So sorry about the little interruption there. That's not ideal, but I'm happy to answer questions or just hear your stories.
Well, you mentioned craft, and I think we also talked just generally about before the session that but you know, that self-care and mindfulness you also put as part of strategies that can help. Then so maybe you could just give us, you know, a brief synopsis of what you think are good examples of self-care and mindfulness.
Yeah, well, self-care, for me, it started very small. I was actually really physically sick by the time my son ended up in the hospital. So I started walking around 1 block once a day. It was that small. And somebody turned me on to Insight Timer, the app, Insight Timer, where they've got meditations and talks and things like that. And you know, I was telling somebody the other day, I had never even heard the term self-care. Somebody said it at an Al-Anon meeting, and I was like, what is that? I've never heard the term. And she was talking about how, you know, we put everybody first and we put ourselves last. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. And so it was just nice to have permission from somebody to say, yeah, you need to drink some water, like take a walk around the block, you know, connect with a friend. I think the isolation for me was really, really bad. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want my friends to know. I didn't want anybody to know. So mine started very small with just a little bit of movement, trying to eat better. I'd lost like 15, 20 pounds because I feel like people either really overeat or they really undereat. So I tried to start getting my food situation a little bit more in sync with what it should be. just, like creating that little basket is a great example of self-care. Put a tea bag in there, just things that you like so that it's there and present. Having a gratitude practice in our community, we call it 3 at 3. So at 3 o'clock every day, we just stop and we think about 3 things that we're grateful for. And just that, it's amazing how that can just shift the energy of your day and shift your mindset to get out of that, like, the swirl down the drain that we do. Because I think a lot of us are really good, like we could write movies like, oh, well, if he misses the bus to get to the job, then he's not going to be able to do that. And all of a sudden we're like 10 years in the future and our kid hasn't even missed the bus yet, but we've gone there in our mind. So just trying to, that's where I think the mindfulness comes in, of staying present. And I talk a lot about being the observer of the situation. So trying to, don't be the person who, like, you think about it as a train station, all the trains are going through Grand Central Station, and your job is to be the conductor and sit up here and watch all of that. Don't get on the train, just watch it and try to pull back a little bit, because that just helps you get out of that emotional swirl. So those are the things I would say to try and implement.
Well, great ones. Okay, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Brenda. This has been...
Okay, Liza, and then Carrie will be next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No
I did too much crosstalk. You can go ahead and I can...
No, Liza, you go. You're
okay.
Good.
Thank you for a lot of very practical, specific suggestions. In particular, I just appreciated hearing about talking to my son about relapse, because I do find that to be a scary subject. It has happened with us, so been down that road, but I don't know if you have any information about like really specific words. I wrote down everything you said, but I find with all 3 of my kids, and especially with Drew, anything I'm talking about in advance of something happening, it can be very innocuous. It's just a healthier, calmer conversation. And then you just know what to do in the situation. So
yeah,
not sure where the question is there, except any wording you have would be welcome.
Yeah, I would say, do you know the information sandwich? Does that sound familiar? Okay, so that's a craft term. You can look it up. The information sandwich. So it's really a way to, when you want to have a conversation with somebody and you know that there's potential for it to go south, or potential for them to be like, defensive and push back, is to start out by asking for permission to have that conversation. So to say, hey, there's something I'd really love to talk to you about. I went to this meeting the other night. I heard this really interesting thing. Would now be a good time to talk about it? And you can kind of gauge, right? Him, like, when he's more receptive and less receptive. But just asking for that permission is that part of the sandwich. Is like the top of the sandwich. And then if he's like, no, like this is not a good time, then you just, okay, you have to honor that. So when you do get that green light of like, yeah, I don't know, like, what are you talking about? Sure, I've got a couple minutes. And you could even say, well, I went to this meeting and there was this crazy lady whose internet didn't work, and she was talking about how we can actually like talk about this stuff. We don't have to keep it all bottled up. And you could just say, for me, I'm going to do this, instead of like, I think we should do this together and let's sit down and make this plan. But just to say, I just think it would really help me be a little bit more calm. So these are some of the things that I'm going to do. And I just thought I would share that with you. So that can kind of open the conversation. And then, so that's the middle of the sandwich. And then the bottom of the sandwich is, you kind of circle back, like, does that make sense to you? do you have any questions about that? You know, just sort of closing the loop so it's not just like, you know, how conversations just sort of fade away sometimes. So you really want to kind of close the loop and just say, so that's what I'm going to be doing. You know, let me know if you want to talk about it again sometime. So that could be one way to start to have the conversation with him. But just, I always like to just use curious words. You know, I'm just curious. You could say to him, I'm just curious. Do you ever recognize, are there times when you feel a little bit more triggered than others? And try to use open-ended questions so that he can't just say yes or no. For my son, there's a certain street in Seattle where all the fast food restaurants are, where he used to go and get his drugs. And the last time he was here, and he had never said that to me before, and we were driving, and he said, "Hey, Mom, do you think we can take the freeway? Because every time we drive down this street, I just get so triggered." I was like, why? It's just a street. He's like, well, that's the McDonald's where I used to get my Xanax, and that's the Taco Bell where I used to get, and I was like, oh my gosh. So you could just say, are there, because, you know, just be curious, like, gosh, I'm really curious, what triggers you? Have you noticed that? So that might be a way to ease into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Brenda.
Yeah.
I got a lot out of what you're saying. While we were waiting for you to get back online, I said that this is something I would have appreciated 5 years ago when we started down our rabbit hole. And it would have been so helpful, almost like having a talk like this would be just so beneficial for high school parents. You know, something useful that they could use, because so many kids are struggling with this kind of thing right now. And I heard you say to Paul before everybody was getting online about how when you open up about it, you realize how many other people are struggling as well. And there's just, it's still such taboo. People don't want to talk about it. And it's amazing how many more people struggle with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think everybody probably feels the same way that you and I do about it. And you know, how do we get it so that it's not taboo? And, you know, I try to be like an open book, kind of like you said, ask me anything, I'm an open book. And, you know, when people ask how my son is doing, they're thinking just general, has he graduated from college yet? And when I bring up about his struggles, they're like, whoa, you know,
like the eyes get really big.
yeah, but, you know,
Yeah.
and thank you for your honesty for talking about it. But it's just so hard. I mean, so like, I'm just trying to be real. But do you have any other suggestions for how you did it too?
Yeah. I first had to get really comfortable with it myself. And so I had to get to the point where I wasn't blaming myself. You know, this is my fault. I did something. If I hadn't let him go to that sleepover in fourth grade, if I hadn't put him on ADHD medication, you know, if. And I finally, you know, I talked to so many people and they were like, you cannot make somebody into an addict. Like, it's impossible. It's actually impossible. So I had to get okay with it myself and kind of resolve a lot of that inside of me. And then I was just hugely pissed off. And I think at some point as parents, when we get pissed off enough, you do something, right? Like, look at Paul, what he's done for all the families that he's helped. And it's like, yeah, I'm really pissed. Nobody's talking about this. And our kids are dying, you know? I see stuff on the news about this just nonsense stuff about whatever, I don't even know. And it drives me insane because I'm like, why are we not talking about this? So I think it was just a combination of seeing my son on life support, you know, just having gone through all of that and then really coming to terms with my role in it and knowing that I had to get myself healthy in order to help him, because I was of no use to him when I was so sick. And all of that kind of came together, and then just the pissed off factor. And I was like, that's it. I'm talking about it. I just don't even care anymore, because I know there's so many people like me out there. In our community, we talked the other day about we need to have a parents coming out day. Like, we need to have a parent visibility day for us to be able to say, my child is really struggling. And, you know, we have that for LGBTQ communities, we have that for all kinds of different groups of people, but we don't have that for us to say, I am the proud parent of a kid with substance use disorder. You know, I want a bumper sticker. So I think it's just getting feisty and talking about it. Like, I will talk to anybody who I can, you know, find an ear. So
Thank you very much.
yeah.
I agree with you too.
Yeah.
So you have, you know, I could say maybe 185 parents have come through one of our support meetings, and, you know, so many have come through pathway sessions or the vigil. But on a good day, when you have had a podcast on Hope Stream that people have listened to, how many have you gotten?
How many podcasts?
No, how many people have you gotten to listen on a really good podcast?
It's right around 50,000 downloads right now. Yeah. From
that deserves
40...
an applause.
I think it's 43 different countries.
You're the one that has to lead Parent Visibility Day.
I know. I kind of a few other things to do, but yeah, I mean, I'm serious. I would do it. I need help. But yeah, it just goes to show you that if you are willing to talk about it and put it out there. And I also, you know, I think it's also important to say that I had to not get my son's blessing, but I really needed him to support me in it, in everything that I'm doing. And it was hard because he was just in that like very fragile stage of just coming out of that second overdose. And he was still like, I will smoke pot until the day I die. And, you know, I'm going to be 90 years old, still smoking pot. And I'm like, whatever, just stay away from the fentanyl, you know. So it wasn't a straight path for him either. He still smoked weed, and he still, you know, it was just a little rocky. So when I told him what I wanted to do, it was probably about a year between when he got out of the hospital and he started putting his life back together. And I kind of zeroed in on what I wanted to do with helping parents. And so I talked to him and I said, this is what I really want to do. And I'll still do it, even if, you know, even if you're not in total support, but it would be really great if you could be. And I've made him anonymous in most of my work, but he said, Mom, you got to do it. You got to do it. He's, you know, and so that was really helpful for me to be able to feel like I could just go out there and really talk about it.
So you got so going forward, we're not going to hold you to the Parent Visibility Day, but you're going to be launching a dad's community.
Yeah.
And that's great. And you already have a name for it, correct?
Yes, it's the Woods community. So we hear people talk a lot about we're not out of the woods yet. And so, yeah, it's going to be a really cool space. I'm working with some guys it's a little slow because the guys I'm working with are in the middle of it right now with their kids. And so it's like, okay, this week things are good, so we can work on it. And then things go haywire and then we pause. But we're looking at doing a beta program starting at the end of July. And so it'll run from July until December, just so that we can learn, we can gather information, really tune it to what guys want and need. And then we're going to have, that will culminate in a retreat at the beginning of the year to get everybody, all the guys together to be able to that's one thing that we learned in the women's community is that we really needed to see each other and touch each other and hug each other. And we couldn't do that because I started it during COVID. And so last October of 21, we got together in San Diego. We had 8 of us. We lost one to COVID. She had to drop out because she got COVID the second day of the retreat. But it was just a game changer to be like, oh, you have a body from here down, because we've only seen each other on Zoom, right? It's like, you're a real person, and we could hug each other and have coffee, in our jammies around the kitchen table. And it was so special to meet these other women from all over the country who were like, yeah, you drink the same coffee creamer as me, and your kid's doing the same thing as mine, and that's so cool, and we're just normal people. And so we'll be doing that again. We have our second women's retreat in Park City, Utah in October, and then the guys will be most likely we're going to do a glamping thing in Texas in February. So yeah, but we all just need a safe place to talk about all this, and you guys have this, which is amazing. So great that you do this every week.
Can you, we have at least one person that's into books that's on this call. So what did you do? But this is actually a documentary that you centered a session around, where everybody viewed Gabor Mate's documentary on trauma ahead of time. And then what did you do?
Yeah, and then we had a discussion group around it, and it was really great to hear everybody. For some people, they had already kind of studied and learned a lot about trauma, and some people, it was their very first time to ever really learn about trauma. There is a podcast episode with Steve Sawyer. If you just search Hope Stream, Steve Sawyer, I'm not sure what number it is, but he works with Gabor Mate. And so then we had a discussion, and we had a couple of moms who then, as a result of that, had conversations with their kids just to say, wow, it just changes your perspective about where all of this can be rooted. And it reminded me, we have a mom in our community whose son is 26. He has been in 4 different treatment programs, multiple overdoses, multiple suicide attempts. And for the first time at age 25, he opened up to a therapist and said that he was sexually abused when he was 6 years old. He'd gone since he was 5 years old and never told a single soul about that. And so you look at what that does inside of somebody, and that's what that documentary is really about. And so it's a game changer. It is available to watch now. They just released it you can make a donation. If you can make any amount of donation that you want to watch it, but I would highly recommend it. It's very insightful, and it really can change your perspective and just your level of compassion and empathy for people who are struggling. Because really the substance use is the Band-Aid for all of the hurt. And so it just kind of flips the thinking on that. And there's another documentary, it's called Uprooting Addiction. And I did an episode also with the director of that film, and that's another good one to watch, kind of along the same lines. I think that's
that one. The Hope Payson is in Connecticut, so
yes,
yeah,
she's amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I haven't watched that either, but one of the guys that was speaking was Daryl. And he spoke. He was kind of the keynote speaker at our last vigil, last September 1st.
Awesome.
Such
a cool guy. Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Now, I have some other people on this call that I think might have some questions. I know Morgan usually does when she's not doing 3 things at once. And then Lisa sometimes does, but she's taking notes. That's good. Look at that.
Yeah, I love that.
She's got the notes. Jim has a little bit different perspective. From Minnesota. Are you originally from, Jim? I know you're here in Connecticut now.
Originally from Minnesota, but I took a detour through Texas. I just moved to Connecticut after 35 years in Texas.
Wow.
You were talking about the weather before we started, and I'm just on cloud nine with the weather. I mean, we literally just got here a couple of weeks ago.
Wow. Congratulations on your move.
So I'm giving anybody a chance to ask another question. Otherwise, we can, we're going to have the recording, and we're even going to, have the discussion. I'm not going to cut out the discussion we had when you weren't on, Brenda. We actually had a good discussion, on what on your first half, the first half of your comments, and then we kept going here. And thanks for going a little bit over.
Absolutely.
But this is good. Rich, did you have another question, or are you good?
I have another question. I guess I shot your note by email. It occurs to me that, as I heard this right, I have had several well-intended but very awkward questions. So how are your kids doing? And I have 3 children, and they're having a variety of struggles and successes. And being better able to talk about those and respond to those in a way that could get the well-meaning questioner, because there are several that aren't well-meaning. I'm not going to pretend that's not the case.
Right.
There are several that really just want to ask you that, so you ask about them, and they can give you the script. But putting those people aside, because I've been through enough that I don't care about that anymore. But turning the people that care into educated advocates with an answer that's right is, frankly, takes the time that I have not had the luxury for.
Yeah.
The last couple of years. I'm just coming to that now, because thank God things have stabilized quite a bit, and we are in a much better place than we were it wasn't just my son's addiction. We had an interesting coincidence of events with grandparents passing in quick succession, other usual life things, just compressed in an unfortunate coincidence of time, of time. But I guess where I'm getting to in a very long-winded way is, as I've been through this and gotten lots of support, it strikes me that having some succinct advice as to sort of how to respond to those questions in a way that quickly sorts out the people that are actually interested in wanting to be helpful from those that aren't, in a way like, yes, my son's had some struggles. We've learned that it's affecting a lot more people than we ever thought, and we've become a lot more empathetic. And if you hear about it in the future, please listen more, because it's something that's affecting a lot more people than you might think. Whatever that might be. Just as if when I tell people that my dad has dementia, they pretty quickly say, yeah, I understand that's affecting a lot of people, right? So to turn those people that are asking those questions that are well-meaning into advocates, even at the distance point they might be, is something I'm going to actually spend some time on post this, and figure out how that might go to the next level. Because, as I said, we're blessed for today, and it's just for today that I now can think about these second level, I almost call them luxuries,
right.
Right.
So true.
We're done. We're not doing the daily hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
So think about these second order, higher order things about how to make things a little bit better, because obviously things are changing a lot. When you talked earlier about people having groups like for LGBTQ and other things where there's advocates, to be able to say that, it's along those thoughts. Like, I think there's a lot of people that are sympathetic, and they do have people in their families, and it does resonate with more people. They just need to hear it in a way that's different from the usual, well, Junior's only got a 3.8 in the Ivy League school, so we're not sure if he's quite going to make it to the next bulge bracket banking job, by the time he's 22. Those types of things, because we do all, I think, travel. I'm making an assumption here, unfortunately, in a lot of different circles, right, with a lot of different people. And most of them are well-meaning. More are well-meaning than you think. It just strikes me that the conversation is just more awkward than it needs to be.
Yes, it can be an awkward conversation, and you're right, there's no quick way to get there. Like, oh, my mom has dementia. Super easy to understand. When you say my kid's struggling with heroin, first of all, you got to be really careful who you say that to, right? Because that's going to go one way or the other really quickly. And so, yeah, I think you have to be able to just kind of know who that is. And if you don't really know, I now err on the side of just putting it out there. But I do that only because I know that my son's okay with me talking about it. And when he was struggling and if he wasn't, I didn't want to say anything to people because I didn't want them to know, not as much for me, but for him. And so, he dropped out of school after his sophomore year in high school. So it was like, oh, well, where's Enzo? Well, how come he's not, he wasn't ever at family functions and all that. It's like, well, where is he? You can only make excuses for so long. Like, oh, well, he got a job at Burger King. Oh, great, but he's never anywhere. So you kind of have to figure out who is safe to say those things around. But once he was okay with me talking about it, and once I was okay with me talking about it, because a lot of times too, I would just fall apart. So in order to keep my head straight and my makeup on, not running down my face, I had to just compartmentalize and just be like, oh, he's kind of taking a non-traditional route. That was my go-to answer. He's taking a non-traditional route. He's not going to college. Because at the time he was sleeping under a tent in the woods in Utah. So it kind of, for me, in the moment, it depended on the day. Was I able to hold it together? So there were some days where I was like fired up and I would talk about it. And then there was days where I would just say, yeah, he's going the non-traditional path. He's doing a little bit of a gap year. And they didn't really need to know what kind of gap it was.
I agree with that. I think the next sort of horizon, if I was to put on a sales and marketing hat, is to say that in a way that it triggers people to become advocates for the cause and not to be so, to your point, like not to be so sheepish about it, because it has been very enlightening to me to see the variety of I mean, this is not a poor person's disease or whatever stigmas you're worried about overcoming. I've learned pretty quickly, and from my time in various functions in law, accounting, and banking, that there's lots of people that are just holding it together and are functional addicts, and it will resonate with them. There's no doubt. And the people that doesn't, I should probably pause and slow down for a minute, but I'm not so sure I care about anymore, because they're not part of the solution. They may be part of the problem.
Yeah.
And that probably was not the right way to say that, but I have sort of two choices, right? I've been silent for a long time, and I've been in this prison of these awkward conversations.
Yeah.
Even going out for groceries, and I'm just not willing to be there anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And also I find sharing resources. So, I mean, luckily I host a podcast, so I just give people a card. I'm like, oh, here's what I'm doing. I give them my business card, and they're like, oh, parenting kids through drug use and addiction. Okay, that's pretty clear. So sometimes even just, hey, if you want to kind of understand what we're going through, listen to this podcast. Or Beyond Addiction is a phenomenal book if you haven't read it. Probably the best book out there for parents. And so, I've said that before, like, people say, oh, what are you reading? That's a popular thing. What are you reading? I'm reading Beyond Addiction, even though I've read it 100 times. Like, I just say, oh, I'm just reading Beyond Addiction. It's been really helpful for our family. And people get it. And then if they're the friendly kind that want to know more, they'll be like, oh, my nephew or my sister or whoever. And then that opens that really beautiful conversation. And if they go, oh, then you're just like, bye-bye.
Well, they also may just not get it. They may be fortunate enough to have not had get it and deal with it.
Exactly.
It could just be oblivious. I mean, that's not a
right.
It's not the crime I take it to be based on all the pain I've experienced. It just is what it is. And I guess my point is recognizing who's asking and pausing, which most days you don't really have the luxury of doing when you're in the chaos is the word I've heard most often and found most applicable to the fight with addiction in the early stages. You can't do, but that doesn't change the fact that they just don't know any better.
Yeah.
Right.
And lucky them, right? Like.
Well, yeah, no, that's all true. But then, like, how do I deal with that, right? And what do I do? And that's part of my recovery, not my kids' recovery.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Brenda,
great.
You know, you and I, what we need to do is we need to be able to harness the people like Rich who are at this point where they can make a difference. Or, you know, Jim on the call, I think he's open about himself being in recovery, and he is doing what he can from a totally different angle. So what we just need to do is harness those people. I'd say Jacqueline is ready in many ways.
I actually wanted to talk to Brenda, and I mean, probably we'll do this offline because I've got a lot of questions for you. Because like you, after my son was done with treatment, what I learned on my year journey with him just kind of changed my perspective on life, on career, on everything. And I decided, that's it. This is where my life is now. And I left broadcast television and news production and became a recovery coach, or tried to anyway. And I'm struggling to be a family coach, because that's where I believe that's my wheelhouse, and that's where I feel like I can share the most and impart most wisdom or mistakes that I've made along the way. And it's been very, very difficult, because so much of this world and a lot of the places where I want to work is reliant upon grants and SAMHSA and DEMAS, and that moves at a glacial pace. And I've been waiting on like 4 different jobs for the past 6 to 3 months, and now it looks like a couple of weeks possibly, but not sure. And now there are new regulations where they're looking for group facilitators, which I would also love to do. But again, there's just all these different complications that come into play. And I just want to get out there and do stuff. And I just wanted to know what made you decide on a podcast. And this is something that we can absolutely talk about offline.
Why don't we do that? Because, already, Brenda, I do want to thank you. You've gone over. You've already had said that even though we like to give honorariums to our guests, our visitors that are speakers, you said, well, put that right back into the support group. You've done a lot already, and I bet you would be willing, with your really impressive scheduling system, to set up a little bit of time for Jacqueline. You won't believe the scheduling system she has, Jacqueline. You go into the, it matches up your schedule and hers like automatically.
Right.
So we will let you circle back on that. And again, I just want to thank you, Brenda, and I think everyone on this call right now will join me in thanking you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
very much.
Yeah, thanks all of you for putting in the hard work for your kiddos. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting. So and Jacqueline, I would love to talk to you. So definitely grab some time with me.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. And good luck, Brenda, as you move forward. And thanks everybody for being on this session. And don't forget our Addiction Awareness Vigil, September 1st, 7 p.m. Be there or be square.
And Paul, I'll send you the slides because there's some links in there for people too. So
great.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.